Not long after I started this YouTube channel and it started to generate a bit of an audience, the McCarrick scandal and all the refuse that came with it broke in the Catholic Church. And so I decided for the first time to do a commentary on scandal in the church because it was something that I was struggling with and trying to sort through in my own mind. And that video, relative to other content that I was producing at the time, went somewhat viral, which showed me that there was a lot of interest in that kind of content, which became something of a temptation for me. The temptation was that I could shift the focus of my channel towards criticism and outrage and scandal commentary, and that this would generate, presumably based on my own experience, a lot more notoriety and frankly just easy clicks and subscriptions for my channel. And I noticed that a few other publishers of podcasts and YouTube channels, some of whom were limping along at that point that I had been following, seemed to be drawn to the same thing, and I wondered if they were being similarly tempted. And the thing about temptation is that it's so easy to rationalize and justify as if you're doing something in the service of the greater good. For my part, I thought about it, and I remembered that that's not why I started this channel in the first place. And as tempting as the potential fame and fortune that could come along from capitalizing on this current state of affairs was, I decided to stay true to what I had intended to do from the outset. But witnessing the kind of explosive growth that some of those publishers have experienced since they shifted in the opposite direction, really confirmed my suspicions, and it showed me that there is a strong appetite out there for this kind of content, which again creates that outside pressure to succumb to that temptation. So I thought I would take this opportunity to explain why I haven't gone in that direction, why I've refused to do so, especially as it relates to criticizing the Pope. Since dealing with scandal in the church is something that every faithful person will have to navigate from time to time, I think it's important to point out that it's almost impossible to do so without relying on a consistent habit of prayer, which is why I think it's fitting to take the opportunity to promote this week's sponsor, which is Hallow. St. Augustine says something like, "What is more profitable to our lives, what is sweeter to our souls, and what is more sublime to our whole life than the practice of prayer," implying that there is nothing more profitable to our lives. He also admitted that there are distractions out there that will compete with our habit of prayer, which are relentless. He said something like, "Even the straws under my knees shout at me to distract me from prayer." So if you're struggling with developing a habit of prayer, I really want to urge you to try and find ways to create that habit. And one such tool can be an app like Hallow, which is designed to compete with all those digital tools and digital distractions that are out there that draw us away from prayer and refocus our attention back to prayer using that same mechanism. There are a lot of creative and useful features in the app, as it helps to customize a prayer routine based on your specific goals and needs, and then it helps you stay on track. And if that doesn't convince you, then I imagine that bedtime stories read to you by Father Mike Schmitz, that should do the trick.
Hello, and welcome
nice.
to tonight's sleep
calming.
story. My name is Father Mike Schmitz.
So I would strongly encourage you to try something out like the Hallow app. It's got a forever free version downloadable at all the locations where you normally get your apps. But for those who want to take it to the next level and really enhance their prayer life, there is a commercial version that unlocks even more features. And if you want to try out that commercial version, they've generously offered a trial version of that to listeners of this channel. If you go to hallow.com/Brian, you can sign up from there, and I'll try to leave a link in the description for this video. In order to understand why I think Catholics in general should avoid criticizing the Pope and why I have refused to do so publicly, I think it's important to understand the church through the analogy of a family. Because God is invisible, he is spirit, and he is all-powerful, and all of these things that we are not, he can often feel remote to us. But out of his mercy and love and a desire to be close to us, he's often made himself available to us in ways that we can understand and experience, and that's often through mechanisms like human relationships. The commandment to love God is so often paired with the commandment to love our neighbors or to love each other, as if the two are inseparable. We learn to love God by loving each other in human relationships. Jesus even said that whatever we do for the least among us, we do for him. And he said that we will be known as his disciples by the ways that we love one another. And if you're still not convinced, what about the fact that God, in his desire to relate to us and for us to be able to relate to him and to experience his love and mercy, became human through the person of Jesus, in the most profound example of our need to be able to experience him and relate to him through our human experience and human nature. And what is a more profound image of human love than the image of the family? The Catechism of the Catholic Church says that Jesus chose to be born in the context of the Holy Family. And then it goes on to say that the church is nothing more than the family of God. And since it is a family, and since God has always designed our experiences of relationship with him to follow the pattern of human relationships, then it makes sense that there would be a head of the church of this family, which we've always understood to be the Holy Father, the Pope. Now, before anybody throws out the obvious objection that Jesus said to call no man father in Matthew 23, Jesus himself conceded this concept of spiritual fatherhood when he called Abraham Father Abraham in John 8. And in 1 Corinthians 4:15, St. Paul explains to them that he became a spiritual father to them through the gospel. So if the Pope is our spiritual father and therefore the head of our family, and if we are intent on following God's lead by loving him through the experience of loving each other in our human relationships, then we should ask ourselves, how is it that we love our fathers? Well, for starters, the fourth commandment says that we are to honor our father and our mothers. So how do we do that? When I was a kid and our domestic life seemed to be unraveling, I remember sometimes my parents would call together a family meeting where we would all gather around the kitchen table and start to work through our problems. And as much as we would roll our eyes and as much as we hated doing that, it was a necessary thing and probably the best way to resolve our issues by getting together and working them out internally. What we didn't do, especially for us as kids, was to go out and broadcast to the neighborhood everything that we hated about our parents. And if we did do something like that, it would certainly have been in violation of the fourth commandment. I remember seeing a headline recently about how one of Donald Trump's nieces was involved in a tell-all scandal-ridden book that was designed to injure his character. And if that family has a patriarchal figure, a father figure for the whole family, it's probably President Donald Trump. And whether you love him or hate him, just from an outsider's perspective, it's fairly obvious that he's had some failings as a father figure in that family. The fact that he's been married 3 times is a perfect example. But when I saw his niece was doing this, I couldn't help but being repulsed by it a little bit. It seemed to me like it was a serious betrayal, not just against Donald Trump, but against the entire family. And the obvious reason is because it's being used by his and the family's enemies against their interests. When you attack the head of a family, you attack the whole family. There's really no separation of those two actions. And this is definitely true of the church. I can't count the number of times where I saw a comment on one of my videos where I'm doing this work to try to share with people why the church is the true church of Jesus Christ and why they should be adopted into it. But the reaction I get in some of these comments is from people saying why they would never join the church because the Pope is evil and the church is evil. And to provide evidence for that claim, they are citing Catholic sources that are criticizing Pope Francis. Attacking or even just harshly criticizing the Pope gives ammunition for those who would want to attack the whole family. But this raises an obvious question. What do we do if we have a bad Pope? And I think you could ask that same question of a child with a bad father. And while there are no easy answers to that question, I do think we can draw a lot of insight by looking at the domestic life. For one, children do not have the right to offer correction to their parents. Anyone who is a parent knows this, and to assume otherwise would be only out of an extreme case of arrogance and pride. But others do have that right, and that is how we should trust in the appropriate feedback being delivered through the family of the church. In the case of the domestic life, there are uncles, there are grandparents, and there are spouses who have the right to offer critical feedback to a father who isn't fulfilling his role properly. And when we look at the history of the church, we do see something like that. What we absolutely don't see are examples of lay saints publicly criticizing and condemning the behavior of the Pope. So some good examples that do come to mind would be like when St. Paul rebuked St. Peter when he was conceding to the Judaizers, or when St. Catherine of Siena maintained a correspondence with the Pope who was living in Avignon at the time and urging him to come back and to hold court in Rome. In the case of St. Paul, he was an apostle. He had the authority and the right to offer that kind of critical feedback. Analogous to the family, you could say he was something like an uncle. So what he did was he personally took St. Peter aside and rebuked him. What he didn't do was trash talk him publicly. He dealt with him personally. In the case of St. Catherine of Siena, like I said, she had a personal correspondence and a personal relationship with the Pope, and she used that personal opportunity to offer whatever criticisms that she had for him. What she didn't do was criticize him publicly. And if you want to analogize her role, you could say that she's something like a mother in the church. For those of us who are children in the church or children in the family, there is no precedent that I can find that says that it is our role to offer criticisms to the Pope or to the hierarchy. And the only examples that I can find that did do that were schismatics. So on that note, I want to leave you with St. Thomas Aquinas' definition of schismatic, which comes in question 39 of the second part of his Summa Theologiae. He said that schismatics are those who refuse to submit to the sovereign pontiff and to those who maintain communion with him by acknowledging his supremacy. Thank you so much for watching that. I really hope that you enjoyed it and that you got something out of it. And if you did, and you want to consume more content like this, then please consider subscribing to my channel. Or if you saw this on Facebook, then like my page and follow along. If you're on YouTube, it's not enough anymore to subscribe because YouTube wants to think that it can tell you what you should watch instead of what you actually want to watch. So in this case, you actually have to hit that little bell to be notified as to whether or not I've uploaded something more recently. So please subscribe and hit the bell at the same time. That really helps me out a lot. And if you could consider sharing this among your social network, that helps me a lot too. And if you want to support the making of these videos, please consider supporting my business, which is a communications and strategic marketing company who specializes especially in branding and web design. And this is especially catered towards ministries and apostolates and parishes. We have a parish web design system that we've built specifically for parishes and churches that is affordable, but also beautifully packaged and easy to use. So if you're interested in that, check out my business, which is holdsworthdesign.com, and hit the contact button in the navigation and get in touch, and we can figure out if there's a good fit for you there.